Welcome to the Geneva Connection. It's time to refocus finance to serve people, planet, and profit. From investments, asset management, and venture capital to global markets and corporate strategies, we explore how sustainable finance paves the way for a greener, more resilient, and prosperous future for you and the next generations. From Geneva, where finance and diplomacy converge, we bring you expert-led discussions and jargon-free insights on nature-positive finance, impact investing, sustainable financial systems, and cutting-edge innovations. Let's talk finance. Let's talk impact. Sustainable investing is growing fast and playing an increasingly important role in financial markets. But how do we sustain the momentum and ensure real impact? That's where Building Bridges comes in to tackle these questions and inspire action. This first season of the Geneva Connection spotlights the latest edition of Building Bridges, where top experts from finance, business, and civil society discuss the big challenges in sustainable finance. We sat down with key voices to explore nature finance, impact investing, transition finance, and the social and equity dimensions of finance. In this first episode, we explore the origins of Building Bridges and discuss Geneva and Switzerland's key role in advancing sustainable finance globally. We have 3 engaging segments lined up, each with insights from a different guest. I'm Luca Bernacchi, your host for this season. Let's get started. We'll begin by exploring the background of Building Bridges. Joining us is Patrick Odier, chairman of the Building Bridges Foundation, chairman of the Supervisory Board of Lombard Odier Group, and the president of Swiss Sustainable Finance. With decades of experience, Patrick has been advocating for aligning financial systems with today's pressing environmental and social challenges. Patrick will share insights into the vision and evolution of Building Bridges, highlighting Geneva's role as both the host city and a global hub for sustainable finance. Let's begin. Hi, Patrick. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. When we think about sustainable finance in Switzerland, your name very often comes to mind. It's also thanks to your role in making Building Bridges the success it is today, though I'm sure you'd also credit your amazing team and the board as well. But for some listeners who might not be familiar with Building Bridges, could we take a step back? And can you walk us through its history? What was the original goal and how have those goals evolved over time?
I think it's important to remind ourselves that Switzerland has had 2 converging advantages. On the one hand, we have most of the international organizations and most of the counterparties with whom issues such as the transformation of our global economic model can be discussed. And on the other hand, has an industry at the heart of its economy that is known worldwide and is extremely important for the success of the economic activities in itself, the economic activities being one of the ingredients of that transformation. So looking at those 2 converging advantages, it came to the mind of some of us that it was quite paradoxical to have those, but not to have those talk to each other. The idea of talking to each other was to think that by opening the dialogue, solutions could be identified and perhaps the pace of change could be accelerated. The pace of change for the good of society in general. This bridge was created with the help of the head of the United Nations organizations in Geneva, who was very supportive to the idea of developing a dialogue. And that was making it possible to not only have political discussions with the organization, but also very pragmatic ones. Thanks to the enthusiasm of the local trade association in the financial sector, but also the National Trade Association, we were able to create that first dynamic of a community which was not embedded in any infrastructure, legal or economic. It was just a group of people made of the association of these international organizations on one hand and Geneva Sustainable Finance on the other hand, together with la Fondation Genève Place Financière, as well as Swiss Sustainable Finance, that decided to create a moment during the year where this dialogue could take place. And it started by a summit in 2019 that would be accompanied by a number of specific sessions during the week. The first edition attracted 750 participants. We had a very large demand for intervention from parties that wanted to be creating a workshop or a session during the week. Much more that we could welcome, actually. Is more a movement and a community than an event itself. It is a movement because the cause of sustainability and the mission of the transformation has to be pursued, unfortunately, a bit further. We're not there yet. It adds to its complexity every year. The topics that have to be addressed are evolving very fast.
We're now talking about sustainable investments in the trillions of dollars, and it's a big shift. But with the climate and biodiversity crises becoming more urgent, it's clear we need even more investment, and we need it fast. In your view, what's the role of building bridges in this transition?
I like to say that the first role we'd like to play is to have each one and understand each other. And I think frictions and confrontation is a wonderful source of progress. But at one point in time, there should be willingness to converge. There should be understanding of the various languages that are being spoken, and there should be a will to develop concrete solutions. In this respect, it's more of an inspirational effort that we're trying to achieve here. Building bridges cannot pretend being at the origin of this or that idea, but it can be at the origin of the inspiration of this or that idea, and perhaps of the courage with which these ideas are put to the discussion table and then implemented. And we have a few examples of ideas that through this dialogue that was first a surprise because it never existed, and then the source of further improvement of some ideas, some concrete steps were taken. One of them was the creation of the SIFI, a quasi-development bank infrastructure in Switzerland developed by SECO in Switzerland, which is our Department of Economic Affairs, and which basically was encouraged by the warm receptions of the first discussion on the issue, which didn't start at Building Bridge, but were put to more stakeholders at Building Bridges and became a reality and was announced as a reality during the third edition of Building Bridges. Another interesting development was Switzerland finally issued a green bond. The notion of leading by example is so important in sustainability because it has to do with changing mindsets and behavior. We're able to have the presence of federal councils at the Building Bridges. In particular, the Minister of Finance of the time decided to issue the first ever green bond of Switzerland. It was a sign that the Confederation believed that this type of instrument was useful.
Looking ahead, what's your vision for the future of finance as a driver of positive environmental and social change? How can the financial sector evolve to not just mitigate risks, but to actively create opportunities that speed up the transition to a more sustainable world?
Finance is one of the levers. Our own behavior, in whatever capacity it is another, as consumers, as producers, but in any responsibility. Technology will also be one of the levers, and of course, the regulatory side will play an important role, whether as an incentive or a constraint. And I think in this respect, finance will facilitate, accelerate the transition if correctly allocated to the correct solutions or investments that will be instrumental in making the transition. It is important to remind ourselves that instead of taking a photography of where the world is today, or where an industry or where a company is today, what is really of the essence is to identify the actors that are in a position to make change more effective or faster. And that means you could identify industries and economic actors involved in areas that are contributing to worsening the situation, but tomorrow, because they commit to change their business model, will be the main sources of transition and speed of the transition. If you take energy, it's a good example. We all know we should phase out fossil-linked sources of energy, but we also know that, unfortunately, we cannot do without it completely. When it comes to financing these activities, you have two choices. If you strongly believe that this is one of the most damaging industry of the world, and that's probably something to be eliminated as fast as possible, you can take the decision that you just don't finance these industries anymore, and that's it. But who should decide that? Is this one institution? You immediately understand that if one does it alone, it doesn't make any difference. So it has to be a global view, objective, and a commitment. In order to do that, you have to make sure that the incentives for the financial sector to little by little drive that change grows. I think building bridges is a moment a year that can improve the arguments and toolkit through which finance can reorient its activities towards less damaging activities in an orderly manner. This notion of doing it orderly does not mean we have to do it slowly, but we have to do it recognizing that it's better to integrate the actors, even those contributing to the negative side of the equation, rather than to exclude those actors. And the proof has been that in many instances, energy first, but other instances, the main actors are revealing themselves as probably the most effective actors in the transition.
Geneva is often regarded as a global hub for sustainable finance. In your view, what sets Geneva apart in the space? Does it offer something unique that enhances its leadership?
Switzerland and Geneva are important in this debate and the process of driving the sustainability transition. First of all, the country is ideally equipped. We have a nature which is second to none. We have energy sources, and we have an attitude in general, a mindset in general that calls for taking care of course, and of our environment, taking care of our society, taking care of human values in general. Switzerland has been the pole of attraction for the humanitarian thought process, for the peace thought process, for the multilateral thought process. So why not simply observe that it is quite logical that it can be the natural place and attractive point for the sustainability thought process? All those elements are linked and interconnected. There's no peace without sustainability. There's no positive trade without sustainability. And there's certainly no effective humanitarian protection without sustainability. Switzerland appears as a logical place where this thinking process can be developed. And Geneva, because of the international organizations, and has been playing a role and continue to play a role, because those organizations have evolved towards a sustainability agenda. Take nature, we have the major organizations that deal with nature, climate, economy, trade, health. They all have to do with the sustainability. This is the reason why we are really benefiting in Switzerland and in Geneva of a unique biotope and ecosystem that should be exploited. And that's why we said, let's exploit that privileged situation in a more systematic and dynamic way.
Finally, I'd love for you to share your strategic vision for building bridges. How do you see it evolving in the coming years, and what role do you see it playing in driving systemic change?
First of all, we have to stay relevant, and the notion of the agenda is, of course, very important. We are not the ones setting policies or regulating this whole field of sustainability, but we are the ones where actors can openly discuss the pros and cons of policies, regulations, innovation, technologies, and economic activities in general. And I think the vision is that we should make sure we benefit from what has been discussed in the main conferences, the main organizations where those issues are of their responsibility, to pick up on where they left the discussion. Unfortunately, it's an open discussion in many areas, and capitalize on these discussions to advance and move the needle one step further, to create continuity between where a WEF has left the conversation, where COP has left the conversation, and try to prepare and pick it up in a pragmatic way. The private sector can implement some of the changes that have been proposed. Same way, we're trying to identify areas where the agenda of those discussions should focus. We can play a role in better understanding how solutions in the sustainability transitions have been developed in frontier markets and not simply in the big north part of this planet. And I think by looking more vertically at the sustainability issues, it's not necessarily only an issue of trying to help the countries that have suffered the most and have been the least at the origin of the damages. It's also an issue of looking at where are they solutions for some of these industry transformations that are already implemented and can be replicated elsewhere. There could be solutions in the big south that are perfectly implementable in different parts of the world, including the developed world. That's part of the vision. We want to make sure we can intervene in closed-door discussions, meaning that some stakeholders need to talk to each other to make a solution possible that exists already, but nobody wants to take the initiative. Take, for instance, the big issue of bureaucracy, which is creating pressure in the dialogue between the corporate and the financial sector, because basically the corporate sector says, you in the financial sector are asking us questions all the time, and to add information every day, we cannot spend our days telling you everything about everything all the time. We understand that some of these requirements come from regulation. If regulation requires things that are useless, let's talk about it between those who have to produce the information and those who are requiring to produce information. So we are in discussions in these kinds of areas, as we are in discussions in things that are more technical, such as how to measure sustainability impact in a portfolio. The vision is to continue to be relevant and relevant for all stakeholders, remembering that the goal of building bridges is to accelerate the impact of the financial sector in the sustainability transition for the benefit of our planet and, again, a just transition.
Thank you very much, Patrick. In the second part of this episode, we've sat down with Karen Hitschke, the CEO of the Building Bridges Foundation, to discuss how the initiative turns dialogue into action. From fostering cross-sector collaboration to defining metrics for success, Karen shares her insights on what it takes to keep building bridges impactful and forward-thinking. Hi, Karen. Welcome to our podcast. It's great to have you with us. First of all, congratulations to you and your team on the stellar job. We're recording this interview on day 3 of the event, and the feedback has been fantastic. Patrick gave us some great insights into the backstory of building bridges, but I'd love to hear more about what happens behind the scenes.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. It's really exciting, and as you said, we're in the middle of the conference. We are halfway through, a little bit more, and it's been amazing to see the buzz in the hallways and the interaction of different people. As you say, Patrick has explained also a little bit the background. What's so important about building bridges, as the name says by itself, it really builds bridges between people who are from very different areas, very different backgrounds. Non-profits, for-profits, so basic corporate companies, startups, the banks, of course, financial sector, very important here. The United Nations, and usually they don't talk a lot with each other. So just seeing how they overcome those barriers and start using the same language is already amazing. Now about the question about how do we ensure this stays top of the game and is getting better every year. We are on the foundation side, we have all the different groups as part of our working preparation for the conference. So basically everybody gets involved, and we start about 9 months before the actual conference, which means basically we'll have to start in January again for the next conference. We bring all the different people into the preparation, and that means we hear from the NGOs, from the finance sector, what are the topics that are really on top of their mind. And therefore, what do they think we should address at the conference? So it's not just us saying these are the 4 themes and let's look at that. So we ask our different stakeholders to give us the themes that are on top of their minds, but then we also listen in to the leading conferences. You have, of course, this year we had the COP16 on biodiversity. We have the COP29 in Baku. We do observe the plastic treaty discussions in South Korea. We look at the G20 and we see what are the themes that are coming up. And then we continue working along those themes.
How do we actually ensure that conversations here at Building Bridges lead to concrete action and not just remain ideas on paper?
There's a continuity from one conference to the next. As you have maybe seen, some of these events that you see here have been really curated by us from the foundation, but many of them, in fact, come from event partners. And so what we have is a process where we have 150 applications this last year. We had to select 40 of them. And these partners always provide insights into how they have already collaborated. So they're showcasing their collaboration. what we see in these workshops that we're running is that there's a lot of interactivity. So people then basically embark on that. They say, oh, this is how it's working. So you see already how the network is growing and how other groups get inspired and basically start putting that interaction. But of course, how do you see that? And in fact, a post-conference survey is not sufficient, because that's usually you do that 3 days after the conference and everybody will tell you, yeah, it was amazing, I met these people, and then you go on holidays and nothing happens. What we will start doing now is basically that we do a survey about half a year later and start tracking and ask people to say, so what came out in the longer term? And then basically we invite them back to the next conference, and then basically they are the ones who are then going to present what progress has been made throughout the year. So that's one way how we want to start tracking what kind of concrete progress has been made between the conferences. And then there's another important element. We just turn from being, let's say, just a conference, not wanting to minimize, of course, the just, to being a foundation, which allows us to really work throughout the year with our own team. So what we are seeing already, certain trends that are coming out of the conference where we see these are really topics. If we want to make progress on that, we really need the diversity around the table. We need to bring these different groups together. So what we will curate throughout the year are work streams behind, let's say, more in smaller groups, where we really bring these different groups together and we want to make concrete progress. Could be on the regulatory side, could be on the reporting side, maybe on how to mobilize more funding for the low and middle income countries. And we will then also work concretely on topics, bring the right people together, so then we can also ensure progress along those lines.
From your experience with building bridges, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities when it comes to running a cross-sector initiative like this?
I think that's a fantastic question. And so I'm a big believer in making different parties, different people talk to each other rather than working in silos. I started my career in the profit sector. I'm a venture capital investor originally, moved into impact investing, was working for a nonprofit. So I've basically straddled all these different worlds. And once you're in there, you notice how differently people think. So I think it's absolutely necessary for everybody not to work in a silo, but really be open-minded. And this is not just getting in contact, but really thinking outside of the box and trying to understand the other side's perspectives. But that requires quite a lot of energy and purpose, and not everybody is willing to do it. That's very obvious. So I think here we have very progressive representatives of their sector, because they are the ones who are willing to open their minds and really listen to the other side without being offended right away just because they interpret one word differently than somebody else. That's an opportunity, because the only way we are going to solve the issues that we are facing at the moment, they're hugely complex. If we don't work across sectors, we're not going to make it work. Let's talk about healthcare, for example. You need insurance players who provide the health insurance, so there's a market. So whoever provides the health service, for example, is then being paid for that. The patient needs to be able to afford it. The government needs to have certain rules. So you need all these different players. You're not going to get around without them. But if we don't make them work together and they don't understand who plays which role, we're not going to solve these issues. That's, of course, the opportunity and the challenge. You're not speaking the same language. I love one example, if I can just bring that, investment. So if you are a financial investor, or you are somebody who wants to put his money somewhere in a bank, you're doing an investment, you are expecting a financial return. If you're a foundation and you're doing an investment, it means you're investing a philanthropic dollar, a grant, into a purpose. And you're using the same word of investment, but we are talking very different things. And that's a great example on how you really have to start understanding each other's language and put them into context to say, how can we make progress? And it's a never-ending story. We have built some bridges, but there are a lot of people who have to cross that bridge. And I think that's really, we have our work cut out on that, I think.
Looking ahead, what's your long-term vision for the Building Bridges Foundation, and where do you see it heading in the next few years?
The conference, it's very strongly rooted in Geneva, in that very unique ecosystem with different players. So you hardly have that anywhere in the world. That also means that until now, it's been more focused on the, I would say, not necessarily on the community, but if you look at the visitors, participants, last year we had about 70% from Switzerland and 30% international. Obviously, the agenda that we're driving, the sustainable finance agenda, is a global one. And that means, one, we need to internationalize. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to have conferences all over the place. It also doesn't mean we have to do a mini climate week in Geneva, but we need to understand how to bring these different perspectives in and create that connection. We did one start this year. We had a small summit in Kenya earlier this year. And it was very interesting to see how the concept of building bridges, bringing very different worlds together in Kenya in a much smaller scale, was hugely successful. So we have some very concrete outcome of collaborations from that one trip, which was basically a 2-day mini summit. And it's really encouraging to see how we can do that. So one thought will certainly be about how can we partner also internationally to have a more regional connection and to create those bridges then also between Geneva and different regions like Africa, maybe Asia, Latin America. So that is certainly one direction, internationalization. And then, as I said, I think there are specific topics which just lend themselves for that diversity. And those are the ones we're going to pursue.
Karen, thank you very much. Switzerland is one of the top 3 global financial hubs for sustainable investment, managing over 2 trillion Swiss francs in ESG assets. To help us understand what drives this leadership and how Switzerland continues to innovate, we spoke with August Benz, board member of Building Bridges and deputy CEO and head of International and Transformation and the Swiss Bankers Association. August shares fascinating insights into Switzerland's sustainable finance landscape and its future direction. Let's dive right in. Hi, August. Such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. At the end of 2022, sustainable investment in Switzerland exceeded 2 trillion Swiss francs, which is an incredible milestone. Do you think that this reflects a broader global trend, or is it a result of a deliberate push by Swiss banks to focus on sustainable finance?
I don't think it's a coincidence. Switzerland has a very, very long history in terms of sustainable finance. This goes actually back more than 40 years ago. And people often don't quite remember where this came from. It's actually going back to that very dramatic event in Basel, a big disaster called Schweizer Halle. One of the chemical firms was on fire. A lot of these things went into the Rhine River and created huge problems everywhere. That actually resulted in a situation that in Basel, the very wealthy Basel people wanted to make sure that this never going to happen again and wanted to make investments which would ensure that this would not happen again. As a result, we had the very first bank globally probably who really started to invest in sustainable investments. This resulted in Switzerland being the founder of the first actual sustainable asset manager, the first actual sustainable pension fund, and on it goes. For more than 40 years, Switzerland's been a pioneer in sustainable finance over these 4 decades. Switzerland is one of the leaders in sustainable finance.
Geneva and Zurich are known as global powerhouses for sustainable finance. How do you see them stacking up against other major hubs like London or Singapore? Is it more about competition or maybe collaboration?
We, of course, collaborate with the sort of financial markets. You may have been aware that from a Swiss Bankers Association perspective, we were very supportive of that mutual recognition agreement, or the official name is Bind-Burn Financial Services Agreement, that actually recognize each other's regulatory requirements. And we have regular discussions with Singapore. There's quite a lot of interaction at every level, at the governmental level, but also at the business level. And in that respect, we don't quite see us as competitors. However, we have different starting points. If you compare Switzerland with London, for example, Switzerland is very much known to be the global leader in private banking wealth management. London is a global leader in asset management, fund management, or investment management. The focus area is slightly different compared to other financial markets. There's a lot of collaboration because everybody can win and learn from each other and improve the services and products that we try to provide to clients and try to improve this further, of course.
Switzerland is known for its transparency and innovation in finance. How do you think these qualities help the country stay ahead in this fast-changing world of sustainable finance?
The challenges in terms of the transition into a more climate-friendly environment are huge in terms of what is required in terms of actual changes that need to be made. And if you want to make changes, of course, that requires, to invest money into new technologies, whatever other projects you see that are necessary to improve that overall situation. And in that respect, this is a significant challenge. And here, that's now one of the key topics that the financial services industry can try to support, because financial services are a part of the solution trying to address this. That's what we have to find out, what are the good ways to address this. So a big topic at the moment is very clear, the amount that needs to be invested per year globally are significant. So that will require a couple of trillions per year globally. From a Swiss-only perspective, we did a study on this as well. For example, Switzerland would need to invest roughly around 400 billion over the next 30 years to achieve the 2050 goals. And how do you do this? That would actually mean to invest roughly around 13 billion per year. And so the question is, where do you find the money? How do we mobilize this amount? If you compare this to the GDP of Switzerland, which is roughly around 800 billion, 13 billion, you have to say it's doable. But still, you need to incentivize investors and clients. How would they invest that money, and why should they do this? And that's the key. How do we mobilize private money, this private capital, to actually move forward with these projects to improve the overall situation? I'm very confident that we will be able to address this. Globally, we have the challenge that in terms of the emissions topic, roughly a third is in the developed countries, but 2/3 is in the less developed countries. If you would do a wind farm project, for example, in Denmark, you will have no problem whatsoever. You actually have a problem to have too many investors who want to invest. If you would do a project somewhere in Africa, you will struggle to find private investors because of the country risk and all the risk associated with it. Even if it's exactly the same project, you will not be able to find that money. And that's something we need to work on. How can we ensure that private investors can find risk appropriate returns to actually do these investments as well? Many people forget that institutional investors or pension funds have statutes which restrict them in terms of how much risk they're allowed to take. Pension fund money is our own money. It's our own personal savings. That's often something that they forget. And of course, they are restricted in terms of how much risk they're allowed to take. And if you do a project in Africa, the risks are in such a dimension that you cannot invest. And we have to find ways how to combine public money, which is there, but not in that amount that is required, to actually leverage then this by investing in private. That is one of the big challenges I see. This big challenge of making all these investments is actually to find ways to mobilize this private capital.
Balancing innovation with good governance and strong regulation can be tricky. We all know that. How does Switzerland manage to push the envelope on innovation while still upholding those high standards? So that's a classic one. Innovation versus regulations. What are your thoughts?
It is a very big topic. I would just quickly refer to the Draghi report. I don't know whether you've read this as well. He made this very clear across many industries, and I very strongly support these findings as well. And that unfortunately is very specifically true also for the European Union, that they regulate in such a way that it creates bureaucracy that negatively impacts growth and the potential to actually do such things, because you are so busy and focused on any kind of, how to fulfill these regulatory requirements. So that's not a good thing. And if you do this, it actually also hinders innovation. In terms of innovation, I would split this in two parts, because you can look at this from a technological perspective. I'm personally very much convinced that these climate challenges that we have, we will not be able to solve this via regulation. I'm very convinced that the human society has always found solutions and technical solutions how to solve this. And there are already very innovative ways to address this. For example, hydrogen is a very big topic, which, by the way, would be one of the challenges for the energy industry is how do we store energy? Very difficult at the moment. Batteries don't really fulfill this. But for example, hydrogen is exactly a tool where you can do this. A couple of countries, unfortunately not the European countries, are really looking to this, where can this be innovation be? If you have such projects, we need to be allowed to invest into this and take this risk to support this innovation. Then, of course, you can look at the innovation from a financial services perspective. And that's what I pointed out. It is very much about how can we mobilize this private capital. And this will require certain regulatory adjustments, how to combine this public money from the governments, but will never be sufficient to finance all this transition. That's where we need to be innovative and creative. There are ideas because it will require leverage. If you have public money, we would probably see a leverage of 3 to 4 times in terms of public money compared to what you can trigger in private money. The public money needs to cover certain risk that they can, that the private investors, or in particular the pension funds, institutional investors, can actually then really invest into these projects. The lever is huge. Pension fund money in Switzerland is 1.4 trillion, almost twice the GDP of Switzerland. That's a huge amount of money, and that's just Switzerland. Globally, there's a lot of capital that people would be very willing to invest in such forward-looking projects.
Switzerland has always been a leader in fostering international cooperation. What role do you think it can play in setting global standards for sustainable finance and encouraging other countries to follow suit?
I can give you just one example, which I think too much time being spent on this, but it's important to address it. It's a topic of greenwashing. So the European Union considers themselves, or at least has done this in the past, as the global leader in terms of regulation. They introduced regulations around greenwashing. It's very rules-based, and it's a huge bureaucratic process that banks and other financial players have to adapt and it's not very effective. Actually results in a situation where financial players then say, we don't want to offer this anymore because the effort is so huge. Now, on our side in Switzerland, we have a much more flexible way to introduce such regulations. We have this possibility of doing self-regulations. An industry can define certain rules and standards that everybody, it's compulsory if you're in an association like Swiss Bankers Association, so every member is obliged to introduce these standards. And that's what we've done around the topic of sustainable finance. In terms of greenwashing, we have discussed this with all the specialists. How does it make sense that we can deliver what the client is looking for and we make it as transparent as possible that he actually gets what he wants? I'm very confident, we introduce now with this self-regulation. Of course, it's a process, but it requires every of our members, so banks in Switzerland, to actually adjust their advisory process, investment process, but also their IT system. So it will cost millions of money. But I think that's much more effective. I think that's a much better way, to address this topic, even if none of these topics will address the overall climate issues that we have. But of course, it's very important for credibility to address this moving forward. So in that respect, we can be a leader in some of these topics. And I strongly believe that our regulation in Switzerland is much more principle-based. It's much more pragmatic for all the players to move forward on these topics. I'm very confident. The other topic we discussed before about, how to mobilize private capital. Again, here, that's a topic where we need to be moving forward and find good ways to address this. We've done a paper on this. Now in Building Bridges, we actually have a working session on this topic as well. And that's what we're trying to push moving forward. I think we will continue to be a world leader. The Global Green Finance Index is showing every year now that, Zurich and Geneva are always among the top 5.
Building Bridges is not just a conference, it's also a platform for discussion and action where the financial sector meets other stakeholders like civil society, international organizations, and indigenous leaders. What do you think is the role of events or platforms like this in fostering sustainable finance globally?
If this event wouldn't be there, we actually, wouldn't have started interacting also with the international organizations or with the civil society or broader. So I think it's an excellent platform to actually really start this dialogue, because new ideas always come when you have this dialogue. And there, of course, here at this platform are very different views of this. Of course, we bring in our perspective from a banking perspective, but there's also NGOs here, startups here as well, who have sometimes different visions and perspectives, ensuring that they do talk to each other. That's what I'm very confident that will result in new ideas. In my perspective, it's a very important platform. And that again, is an innovative approach. I wouldn't know where you have such a possibility somewhere else globally to have that kind of interaction. Geneva is perfectly positioned. And I would suspect this will grow more and more, and it will become better and better. And it will not go away because the topic will be with us for many decades, and until we really hopefully at some point have properly addressed this.
August, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of our very first episode of the Geneva Connection. Thank you so much for joining. We hope you enjoyed it and feel inspired by the conversations we've shared. But this is just the beginning. In our next episode, we'll take a closer look at nature finance, how investing in natural capital can drive growth, mitigate risks, and build a more sustainable economy. We'll also explore how businesses can integrate nature and biodiversity into their strategic goals. It's a fascinating topic you don't want to miss, so make sure to subscribe and tune in. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Geneva Connection.